Hello and welcome to Rolling in Mills, and today we have Laurie Anderson's 2015 poetic documentary, Heart of a Dog. If you don't know who Laurie Anderson is, she's like an experimental multimedia person. She's kind of known for her music, her art, and now her film. She's also famously the wife of the late great Lou Reed, who, if for whatever reason you don't know, was the lead singer of the Velvet Underground. As I mentioned prior, this film fits into the poetic documentary sub-genre of documentary, though I'm not even sure if I'd really call it that. It's documentary in the sense that it's documenting something, but these films tend to be so personal and so subjective that they're more just real-to-life biopics rather than a kind of documentary. Also, they tend to be autobiographical. So in the case of Chris Marker's films, for example, they're all focused around the experience of Chris Marker and his wife, as opposed to strictly documenting other things that are actually happening. The word poetic is used because these tend to be kind of pseudo-essay films, and they're very, poetic in their language. They're very subjective, kind of dreamy. They float from one topic to the other. And it's essentially like actual poetry being read across visual poetry, and the video footage shown or shot is typically experimental or not necessarily explicitly fitting with what's being shown on screen. Also, it can be multimedia, or it can be of things that aren't necessarily even considered visual or filmic. Like, for example, Chris Marker's Sans Soleil, one of the best films ever made, in my opinion. And there's a whole section of that film where we're basically looking through this weird, abstract kind of information gathering machine, and it's this very interesting experience where you're watching something that isn't on celluloid, it isn't painting, it isn't picture, it's just this pure information reading and color, and it's very strange. Now, surprisingly, this film was released in 2015, which was a couple of years after Lou Reed's death. The entire film is about death, in essence, and about how people die, suffering before death, these kind of Buddhist Tibetan Book of the Dead ideas of rebirth, and it's kind of this general theme that hangs over the entire film. But there's never an explicit reference to Lou Reed. In fact, he's not mentioned a single time in the film. The entire film just focuses on the kind of decay and then death of Laurie Anderson's dog. And I'm not sure if that's meant to be a kind of stand-in for Lou Reed, but that's totally possible if it is. But regardless of that, I think it's just interesting to note that, considering how, important Lou Reed was for the music world, that his wife makes a film about death that is never explicitly in reference to him.
And like Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards. But it must be lived forwards.
Now, besides that, I actually don't really have a lot to say about this film. Typically when I do this style of analysis or review, it comes down to, the term itself, analysis, for me tends to be uncovering the kind of cryptic, or not so much hidden, but the pieces that make up the general idea or ideas or concepts of a film. Like, the cinematography, sound design, visual style, whatever, But here, and especially in poetic documentaries, these films are kind of almost analyzing themselves. It's like trying to analyze an essay that is an analysis on something. There's not really any point, because just watching the film will give you a better analysis on the film than I could. Furthermore, it's so personal and subjective that it's a little too hard to just get into. Yet again, you may as well just watch the film. I will say, however, and I did mention Chris Marker and Sans Soleil in particular before, but this film borrows so heavily from Chris Marker's style. And not just Sans Soleil, but Level 5 as well. I will say, though, that Heart of a Dog doesn't have the same visual prowess that Chris Marker had, especially in Sans Soleil, nor do I think it's as profound as Sans Soleil was. And honestly, it kind of distracted me for the whole film, that I was just seeing all of these techniques being used to a T. And I mean, obviously, you know, the topics that they talk about, especially in relation to the kind of Tibetan religious stuff, is very different to what's talked about in Chris Marker's films typically. But it used all the same visual styles, the same kind of footage, exactly the same style of narration, down to the tone of the voice.
The new headquarters of the National Security Agency is finally almost finished.
Last year, people really cried. Now they seem to be getting used to it, accepting that each year death takes a panda, as dragons do young girls in fairy tales.
And it's not as if you shouldn't make films within the same kind of boundaries that other people make them, otherwise, you know, genre wouldn't exist. But here it's so specific, and I mean, poetic documentary is such a specific subgenre anyway that it just kind of hung over me that this film is essentially copying Chris Marker the entire way through. Now that doesn't invalidate it. I still think Heart of a Dog is fantastic, and overall I'd rate this a heart, which if you don't know, basically it means it's too abstract to give a numerical value to. It's just not really possible to rate, essentially. Of course, I'd recommend this film. On top of being really profound and interesting, it's only like 75 minutes long. It's a really short, easy watch. Easy in the sense that it's quick to get through, but I mean, it's pretty heavy going in parts. If you don't have time though, just watch Sun Soleil. If you haven't seen it already, I mean, just watch it. This is basically an advert for Sun Soleil. And yeah, that's it. The natural lighting I had went away as soon as I started recording this. In the eternal words of MC Ride of Death Grips fame, fuck the sun.